So what's going to happen now is please stay in your group. Don't disband, don't move around. It's just too tedious and it takes up too much time. I'm sorry to be such a time Nazi, but we are running on a tight schedule. So what's going to happen now is within your own group, I've already stressed to nominate, choose, arrow one person who could deliver a short summary of 15 minutes of what you've been discussing. And we'll go according to your particular groups, yeah? So we'll start with group 1 and then go on to group 2 and group 3. So like I said, it's short, I'm afraid. And then we'll try and see whether we can squeeze in time for discussion. If not, this session ends followed by lunch, which means that you guys can then go on talking during lunch, yeah? So, can I have group 1 to start us going? Sure, you can have 2, 3, it doesn't matter, as long as, yeah. Take it away, Ken.
Okay, actually, this group, one topic this group talked about was hierarchy. So in this presentation, actually, I will destroy this hierarchical, position that, summarizing the things on behalf of this group. But yeah, actually, we have 2 presenters, and also we probably will ask the help from other members as well. So basically, we found that how ambiguous the idea of dramaturgy and the dramaturg, and in this quote, so basically we discussed about the statement number 1, and we didn't have time to go into statement number 2. But in this statement number 1, what was probably could be the starting point was that the wording that the dramaturg as a person in charge of dramaturgy. And generally, we agreed that this is not a very correct or probably appropriate wording. But when we consider, so the meaning that the dramaturgy is so fundamental in creative process, and the dramaturgy is ubiquitous. So no one person can be in charge of doing dramaturgy. So I believe this is a kind of a consensus in this group. So how we can define the role of dramaturg is the next question. And one possible answer can be it is a person in charge of the process of theater making, or who is aware of the process of the theater making. So basically, we are talking about the so-called production dramaturgs rather than the in-house dramaturgs, and I believe that very few examples of in-house dramaturgs in this area. So probably we better focus on the discussion on the production dramaturgs, I feel. So if we consider the role of dramaturg as kind of a dramaturg as a person who is aware of the process of theater making, of course the things can be quite different, on what the dramaturg actually does in the creative process is really different from process to process, company to company, country to country. But yeah, we still can have some set of things, or the dramaturgs can or should do constantly.
Okay. Thanks. Sure, I'll join in the middle of your thought. So I think what we were discussing is that we made a kind of division between the idea of a role and the idea of a practice. And we discussed that while we were almost all in agreement that the role is ambiguous and quite diverse, that there is something about the practice that happens consistently. We did talk about bringing in the researching perspective, kind of bringing in social and political contexts, intercultural reflections. We really love the idea of the companion, and we talked about sometimes that companion being wanted and not wanted, feeling invited and not feeling completely invited at other times. And also the way in, kind of shaping the way in which the reception of the work also kind of is positioned. With that, we came into the discussion also of responsibility, as much as we discussed what in charge really means for the dramaturg. I think you mentioned that when we talk about responsibility, there is all of this responsibility of tasks that, and yet the responsibility is yours and not yours at the same time. And it is this interestingly complex place that dramaturgy happens in. I think one of the concluding thoughts we had was that of the diversity that takes place within the practice across not just Asian contexts, but the different contexts in which we find ourselves working with. And that sometimes maybe it is to understand the process without necessarily needing to define the minute details of that practice. And one of the points that I wanted to bring to the group was, and then I think Peter clarified it by saying that non-existence also doesn't necessarily define the space. And as there was such a rich discussion about terminology, I found myself not being able to also place myself, because I'm here to kind of assert that I'm a performer who feels like I've dramaturged on performance work, and what does that mean, and how do you work? When a context is divided along linguistic lines, a context is emerging from a ritual context into a post-colonial context, where do you place yourself? Can you say the practice exists, but we don't know what the role is yet? And it's in such a nascent stage that maybe it's okay also that it doesn't exist, and that sometimes we intuitively negotiate those spaces. And one of the things I think I appreciated about the questionnaire was the idea of conflict. And I think in reflection, conflict allows us to negotiate and define also, though we don't know that we're doing it at the time that we fight. I don't know, is there anything? Well, so we did talk a lot about negotiating and what this negotiation means and how differently negotiations can work. We talked about also placing ourselves in the non-dramatic, where how you develop structures within devising contexts, how you are the companion sometimes when the structures exist and when the structures don't exist, and how those two contexts define the practice differently. Anything else that
I think Ngean also brought in the fact that the concept of dramaturgy comes from the idea of a dialectical, all right? That this person is supposed to be another perspective, and that's supposed to be as a counterpoint, and then that's always quite an important thing. And Peter also said that there's lots of things that we must not expect a dramaturg to solve all the problems. Yeah? It's not a problem solver. It's not somebody who comes in and solves all the problems. And again, the neoliberal kind of expectations that it's efficient, you have a dramaturg who will solve all your problems and the issues that you have. And yeah, the three roles: research, companion, and operating on the level of reception and bridging. I think that's all right.
I think the one last thing that Peter did mention also is about the idea of having a particular kind of skill set, and how that can become relevant or meaningful depending on the different kind of production or performance or context you find yourself engaged in. Yeah?
Thank you. What I'm hearing a lot is from the idea of defining and just from terminology to defining is now that there are clear lines between naming and placing the position, and then to move away from defining, but just to put a name there, and then to define the name accordingly to different structures and different organic approaches to the doing of dramaturgy and the dramaturg. Yeah? Thank you so much. We now quickly move on to group 2. We will hold all comments till later. I would like to just get through the reports first, and if we have time, we go on to comments, yeah? Group 2.
Hi. Our group, we were discussing dramaturgy in terms of festivals. So it's because there was curation and programming and cultural mediation, but we just went into curation with respect to festivals, and we didn't cover the other areas. Shankar from Kerala was talking about his festival, and at the beginning there was no curation, and then later on they felt it was problematic, so there was a dramaturgical intervention, and they needed a thematic framework of the festival. So there was a dramaturgical structure. Like, for example, the theme was the body or body politics, and because of the things that are happening in India lately, the bodies of women and all that, and bodies occupy space. And with that, they look at, the opening show, the closing show, and how the concept of the body grows as the festival carries on in the 7 days. So the idea of the body politically, and how can it grow in the 7 days. There was a response from Hong Kong as well as Singapore that from Hong Kong there's no, the curation is not so tight, there's no thematic curation to the festival, so it's more just shows and the audience just go. The same thing in Singapore in the past with our arts festival, but recently there's a team now, and with the M1 Fringe Festival there's also a team, for M1 there's a curatorial brief, and then we look for plays through open call, trawling the net, and commissioning works. And then we ask the artists to write a statement of how their work relates to the theme, because that's how we then would publicize the work, so that the artist is happy with how the work is publicized. But we don't curate it in such a way, because our audience do not follow the festival from beginning to end, because there are competing, concurrent things going on. So the situation in a city like Singapore doesn't allow us to make it so tight. Whereas Shankar was saying that his festival audience are very hungry, and they do come they do follow the festival, and it is. They will make noise if the theme is not growing day by day. Yeah. So I have this too. You can talk about Melbourne and
just to add a little bit in terms of the festival in Kerala. One of the things is that there's a conscious weaving of the regional, the national, and the international strands, with the idea that these take on an evolving presence through the festival, and they enlarge the theme as the festival goes along. And the artists are cognizant of this, and they work towards trying to engage in that manner. There are discussions and so on and so forth through the festival, and then this builds on what is happening within the festival, which David identified something quite interesting, I think, in terms of then the curator or dramaturg working out pressure points through the program, and whether or not these pressure points are working, whether they trigger something or they have the kind of effect that is intended or desired, or they don't and something else happens. And therefore what happens if you're trying to make links through the festival compared to just being a consumer who's, doesn't have that discretionary interest at all. Yeah, then Alison brought up the example of the Festival of Live Art in Melbourne, is that right? In one case, the curation worked really well across the 3 venues where it was happening, and in another instance it didn't, and it became very different as an experience. It became very elitist, it became very exclusionary, whereas initially, in the earlier example, there had been a real sense of the space and, the placing in a way, as well as the intention of the work coming together very nicely. So then the discussion moved to how there is a dramaturgy of people in space and not just the work that comes into the festival. Kind of dramaturging the logistics, especially when there's an experimental program. And the experiment is in part the way in which it's put together and where it's placed rather than just what goes into it. And then the question of then the responsibility of the festival director, not to produce a supermarket dramaturgy, which is David's term, in which there's really a focus on the financial mitigation more than anything else and how things get packaged together, but a more politically enlightened one that engages with the needs of the context and the needs of the artist in relation to that. So then also the M1 example of no allegiance versus quite a lot of allegiance, Hong Kong as well. And then Alison brought up an example of a program in Belfast in which there was a kind of trajectory of discussion that emerged out of a festival. And this discussion was often it was often curated to give priority to silenced bodies and silenced voices in order for this discussion to then affect the work of the next festival. And so there was a kind of circulation that was taking place via the trajectory rather than in the main festival itself. So there's a talking back and talking across. But again, the curating was intense. There's somebody really looking at what's happening, and as a result of that intense watching, which for me is a big part of dramaturgical work, the experience feels richer and becomes, I guess, more intelligent by the sheer presence of that attentiveness. Anything else? Anyone in the room? No?
Great. Very quickly, we are opening up already from looking at the minutiae of thing and person to the bigger picture of curation and programming. And then we're now going to extend even further, group 3, who's going to share their discussions on pedagogy and transmission of the idea, of the thing, of the concept. Take it away. I think they need a mic. Could someone give them the wireless? Great, thanks.
Hello. So in our group, we focused on pedagogy and transmission and what this might mean. The discussion started off first with our experiences with pedagogy or transmission. I guess what links those 2 words together is how to teach this or how to apply it to a certain extent, and that's where the conversation started moving around. So Shintaro was saying that in general, there is no really formal training in dramaturgy. In the academia, or the departments are small and it's currently growing and we're navigating where we are in terms of education. So there are classes in, for example, theater history or criticism, or how to look at a performance and write performance analysis. Usually this is where the education moves around, I suppose. It's also taught in different places, not just in the university setting or a formal school setting. Shintaro even says that they set up a training program, which was a pilot idea a few years ago, exploring the idea of how to train dramaturgs. Nanako for a while was looking for a dramaturgy class or how to study it or where to study it, and asked a lot of dramaturgs in Europe. But what she said was that there was really, what was the advice given to her was that there's really no place to learn dramaturgy, but that you had to learn on the job. Like you don't, sit down and study it formally. So it's actually confusing because later on, I'll jump back and forth. In the conversation within the group, a lot of us who do teach dramaturgy, it didn't really formally also learn dramaturgy from a teacher. So what we have are, educators who have learned via practice and are teaching formally. So that's a very interesting way that sort of developed. And then also we have our particular areas of interest or expertise. So some are more, Heli is into dance and choreography or movement, and others are more theater inclined or text based. And although it's good to have like a general knowledge of theater history, because we have to zone in on our so-called specializations, then sometimes we share, as with Nanoka's example, a semester with another teacher who focuses more on theater, and then she focuses more on dance. So that's one way of doing that. What else did we talk about? Also, Loon was saying that there's no department of dramaturgy. I think that's kind of no one has had a real department of dramaturgy. It falls either under a theater arts program or a fine arts program, and there are specialized classes in it. I'm sorry, what was your name? Sorry. Lian also talked about his experience here at Center 42, where he learned dramaturgy as an apprentice, and he talked about understanding its history from the German context, and then kind of figuring out how to navigate the practice towards an Asian context, and look at performance analysis in a production. And then they get to apply that skill set or knowledge set in productions that they're assigned to. So the structure falls under that. Although again, there are problems of how to negotiate that relationship when you are assigned to a production. Also, hierarchy comes into play. Will a director who is well known or more familiar with structure and or history listen to me or questions that came up? So there was also a discussion on how to document dramaturgy, and this was very interesting because the practice is in itself invisible. Nobody really knows, right? Or you don't see it on stage, whatever it is that we do. So one of the ways in which we can contribute to dramaturgy would be to be some sort of documenter, writers of analysis and program notes, as Ngean explained. Maybe that's where we can contribute, because there's a lack of performance archiving and research in our specific institutions, or they are not accessible to a wide range of people. And how do we make that accessible? I think, if it's just going to be a discussion between a smaller group of people, then why make performance a community event, right? So how do we disseminate that kind of knowledge or process of dramaturgy and theater making or performance making? So that I think went into the soft skill set, which is in the questionnaire. So to a certain extent, the soft skills answer the question of whether or not it may or may not be necessary to have formal education in dramaturgy specifically, because I think most of the people in the group have learned or experienced dramaturgy in practice, by, I suppose, learning how to listen to your collaborators, being very sensitive to the needs of the production, and those things are not academic things that we study. Those are being a person things that we encounter as social beings. So there was a discussion about how that then relates to, I suppose, the institutionalization of the dramaturg, which leads to the naming of the dramaturg, which is, I think, where a big part of the discussion overall is. I mean, what is dramaturgy versus a dramaturg? And what is common, I think, with what we talked about is that dramaturgy existed for a very long time, historically in our specific countries where we practice. It's just that it just didn't have a name, right? Or nobody knew what to call it, or we're calling it different things, which is why the functions tend to shoot out into different trajectories. So in that sense, there's, I think, something political to be said about the act of naming and or self-identifying as a dramaturg. Personally, for me, I had difficulty trying to find fellow dramaturgs in Manila because very few of them identify as dramaturgs, and a lot of people, as with most theater artists, wear different hats or wear multiple hats. So we have, I just decided to call it slasher identity because you're like a director / performance maker / dramaturg / marketing person sometimes, PR, that sort of thing. So because of that, self-identification becomes problematic. And part of identification will also limit the functions that you can do as a dramaturg, because you think that there is a set way of doing it, like coming up with a production book or all of those things. Where else did we go? The soft skills, and then right. So also, Ngean talked about how the job has become more complex, coming back from its history, right? Before, you're just discussing about the text and the text's relationship to performance or live performance. Today, there's just, we've moved toward, away from the traditional notions of what theater can or should be. We have digital aspects of it, choreography and movement and all of these other elements that come into production. So, sometimes when the director is managing so many things, it's really helpful to have someone to talk to about all these elements and how these elements all move together and go together. So that's pretty much it. Does anyone want to add in?
Great, thank you. We all made good time, which means then now we can really engage or try and discuss or have any questions. The questions could be inter, meaning you ask different group, or it could still be intra. Yeah, so we can keep it in any form, anyway. Who would like to start off with comments or observations, or you have questions? Or even just observations or comments on what you have been discussing within your group. Really? Just now you guys had didn't want to give up talking, right? So come on.
I think there was one more thing that we discussed here, which I thought was very interesting. Yinan was saying that in the China context, that the dramaturg is usually an academic, a scholar that will go in, and because of the hierarchy, that it's accorded a lot of respect and power. And Peter says that once you introduce yourself as an academic, nobody will listen to you in the Australian context. So I think that's really quite interesting, the reverence for, so there's a kind of deep-seated divide in one context that you theorists, academics know nothing about production, just shut up or hear what does the scholar have to say about my production in terms of that. So again, the different kind of operating context and how you identify yourself. I mean, it's kind of difficult that you're supposed to do the research and everything. Once you introduce yourself as the academic, nobody will listen to you. So that's just one more thing that I just wanted to throw out. If there's anybody who has a kind of experience, a similar kind of situation. And there was also a lot of talk from, sorry, I didn't get your name. Charlene here, about how we know what we're doing, but we don't know how to talk about it, and we don't know what it actually means, and whether it is even worth giving a title to, at which point then what is my function and role within the kind of like hierarchy of a production and as part of the creative team. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, would you want to say something? Can we have the mic passed on to this gentleman here?
Just to make an observation, My name is Chris. The context in which I'm speaking from for dramaturgy is within the context of my own teaching theatre practice work for cross-cultural playback theatre festivals situated within Temasek Polytechnic and National Heritage Board with reference to creation of heritage exhibitions and trails in Singapore. I am quite intrigued by the specific subtopics being brought up through the group discussion, specifically curation, programming. For me, my assumption for the relationship between these two terms is programming comes under curation. Curation has specific applications and definitions. And there's this mention by Alvin about curation of arts festival. Though within the context of arts festival, the artistic leader could be the artistic director, but the word artistic directions is not used, but curation. It sounds like a crossing of discipline between performing and visual arts, which is, I feel, is strongly divided in Singapore's context with reference to Lascelles and NAFA's teaching. So for me, I use a two-dimensional matrix that I shared with David earlier for dramaturgy, but I thought through the sharing between Sankar, the group members, and David, I thought it brought another layer. The matrix that I use basically is the X and Y axis. The Y axis, primarily my dramaturgy is, I trace it to multiple beginnings. There's the cultural beginnings, whereby there's one way, and then within the culture, there's intracultural consideration where the culture reflects upon itself, which I thought was where Ephraim started with in Germany, where there was accumulation of body of works within the context of his culture. And there's many ways, not one way, therefore many structures so the culture, the intra, and then as the world explodes into a global village, the notion of multicultural. So there's a multicultural dramaturgical research, and then there's an performance of Shakespeare through kabuki, the transliteration of work. And then, of course, there's also the transcultural, which is neither east nor west, but onto itself, a collision between the international and the local. So along this grid of, this line of five, culture, intra, multi, inter, trans, which I loosely group under the term of cross-cultural, there's another axis called, which is X, which is along vocational application. There's the acting dramaturgy, directing dramaturgy, script writing dramaturgy, arts managing dramaturgy, and pedagogical dramaturgy. Across this 5x5 two-dimensional matrix, we get 25 permutations, of which 25 can be interlinked in any way. But what Sankar's mentioned of the festival, and I thought was, I interpret as some form of a very constructive criticism from David, the notion of international, national, and regional narratives, how funding works, how our dramaturgy is being crafted by the way money is being given, and how do we use that money, how do we channel that into our artistic work. I'm quite intrigued by Sankar's model, because I thought there's some other merits to it, because it gives a common platform where the regional, the international, and the national can be blurred. Everyone sees everything. I want to see everything, but yet within city's context, not everyone pledge allegiance to the festival. So it brings a totally second layer to this whole matrix I'm considering right now. How do we fund funds? How do we manage funds within the context of dramaturgy? I think that is important. Just a thought.
Do we have response, Alison?
I think that's really interesting. Oh, no, I've sent one away. The relationship between funding and money and dramaturgy. Last year was the first year of our Masters in Dramaturgy, and we were trying this big mapping thing. It's impossible. It goes all year. And there's a sort of masterclass session every week, and one was a creative producer who came in, and we were having this debate before about, is a creative producer, is that a dramaturgical job? Well, of course it is, but when it becomes about the money, is that dramaturgy? And actually that has stuck as a real point of contention about that. So I think it's very, very interesting that you bring that up, because that's where we hit a sticking point. Yeah. We can go, yes, curation, yes, programming, yes, all these other things, internal to the work, external to the work, money. It's another one, yeah.
No, I think that's really important, but what I really liked about what Shankar was saying was that in the context of a conversation about curation and programming, the way in which we were talking about dramaturgy was the dramaturgical trajectory through the festival sat within the role of the curator, the programmer. And that within that role of the curator, the programmer, actually that's where you have the financial relationship, the financing relationship, not directly in relationship to the dramaturgical responsibility that he has as a curator. So I would love it if it was possible to separate. I don't think that I think it's better that the role of financing is not connected to the role of the dramaturg. I really do, because it's connected to every other aspect. And I think at some point you need somebody not in the artistic process not to think about that. You really do. And I think that's something that we should probably try and fight for in that space, because it's very oppressive in all the other tasks in the process of creating a work. Thanks.
We have a mic. Mio, there's a mic there, right? Over there. Great.
Sorry, I hate to mention where I belongs to, because we are particularly funding for this the place. I'm from Japan Foundation, Kuala Lumpur, but I'm not speaking from the Japan Foundation Asia Center point of view to this forum, but speaking generally from the viewpoint of the founders, I think sometimes it's really interesting that the dramaturgy also connects with the money, and how international, national, regional also relates to how these each funding connect. I think that's very interesting point to mention in here. But on the other hand, maybe particularly in Japan or some Asian countries, when you don't have money, when you don't have access to the country which is far away, and the far it goes, and the money get bigger. And if you had a particular funding at one point, in whatever political reasons, if it exists, and then you have like a dense network of that region of the people. For example, in Japan, we had the Asia Center in 90s, and the amount of the network with Southeast Asian countries and Japan dramatically increased, and then when it disappeared, it dramatically decreased. And now it came back again, and now I could really see that it's increasing. And how can you, as dramaturg or as an artist or programmer or curator, how can you really separate your experience or your environment, which is already influenced by the money, which is not in the point of when you are programming, but when you're programming, you are thinking about the network that you have, which might be a result of the funding already. So when we are talking from the dramaturgist's viewpoint, I think it's very easy to say, we wish that money can be not attached to anything and can be freely flow, so we can really have a free decision. But can that really happen? Because sometimes that the money helps to broaden, and you get influenced by the.
I'd love to respond to that, because I think that there's two things that are going on. You're talking about dramaturgy, and and the role of the dramaturg, and I think they're two separate things. And that's really, I think, something that's very important. If the role of the dramaturg, if the dramaturg and their agency is separate from the financial aspect of it, then what you do is you carve out space whereby their practice and the things that they do are able to serve the creation of an artistic work. When you are talking about dramaturgy, then funding is attached to dramaturgy, because that's actually talking about the system actually in which it is created. So they're two separate things. So I'm proposing that the role of the dramaturg is as much as possible protected from that financing, but actually dramaturgy, which can be applied across artistic, institutional, cultural, is necessarily involved in funding. Ngean is a dramaturg, but in his capacity as he has not put this together this whole network together as a dramaturg is actually what is called a producer or an administrator. It's two very separate skill sets. And I think in terms, even though they live in the same body, and often we all have those things going on in our same bodies, they actually need to be distinguished intellectually and artistically and professionally so that we understand what is being impacted at every single moment, so that we say, I'm applying myself in this way as a producer. However, in the role of the dramaturg, I don't want to be interested in finding the money for that job. That's actually two separate things altogether. And that's why I think it's very interesting in the discussion this morning. The role of the dramaturg is quite different to dramaturgy, and they actually have very different contexts that they operate within. And obviously some of them cross over.
Yeah, I just like to add to David's point, because increasingly in the Singapore context, you have venues and programmers going into producing work or co-producing work with artists, and there are dramaturgical involvement or intervention, and the material and the content can also be policed because the venues here are given a blanket term. They don't have to submit the plays. In Singapore, we have to submit our plays to get a license. But some venues don't have to submit the plays because they have a blanket exemption. And so they police themselves. And so when they go into co-production, they can use a dramaturgical position to actually regulate the content, and that means part of funding, and there is a danger in that.
We have Liangshan has something to say.
I just wanted to say on the flip side, because Heng Long was talking about documentation, and for me that went into the idea of legitimizing dramaturgy and how it helps secure funding. Because I think a lot of the discussion in local, I mean, I'm not being politically correct here, but I just wanted to share my view that a lot of the political discussions in Singapore relating to trying to place emphasis on process rather than a product in terms of our artistic creation. I think dramaturgical work, if we are able to document it, helps to explain and legitimize the artistic process and helps perhaps artists to better explain certain things to the funders, to the sponsors. That's one thing. I understand Alvin's point in terms of policing the work, but my response to it would be a lot of the dramaturgs operate on a very subjective basis, bringing along their own experience and learnings and cultural baggages. I mean, if they were hired by institutions and they, were framed to do certain things, I believe there's some integrity in the dramaturg to refrain from acceding to institutional requests. Yeah.
Just to add on to that, I think I can say a few things about institutions and dramaturgy. As Faith pointed out earlier, my growth in the role of a dramaturg really started when I started working with Esplanade on particular specific dance commissions. And yes, it's a very interesting relationship, I think. Even though the premise is that when they commission a new work from a choreographer, they would always suggest, advise, recommend that perhaps it will be to the choreographer's advantage to work, collaborate, or to have a dramaturg. Also because some of the times these commissions do champion, favor young and upcoming choreographers and artists with whom Esplanade sees as potential artists to grow with. So there is always this fine line, right? And of course, this commissioned choreographer is free to choose, select, to recommend someone to come on board his or her team. Bearing in mind that there are very few dance dramaturgs or dramaturgs in the region, and specifically even in Singapore, this goes back to 2009 or 8. In a way, because of my working relationship, I would always be suggested to the choreographer. But we do go into a lengthy discussion and chat, and there's a getting to know you period. Literally, there's a matchmaking period. Whether the choreographer is comfortable, whether I'm comfortable to take on these things. But the first one or two projects that we entered into, yes, as a dramaturg myself, there was always this slippery slope of, okay, where are the alliances here? Top of my mind is always to serve the work and the art maker. But at the same time, the engagement was with the support of the institution. I have to say, and again, not to be politically correct, Esplanade gave quite a bit of leeway, a lot of leeway actually, mainly because we were all still also trying to figure out and negotiate the function of dramaturgy, the role of the dramaturg, yeah? And so there was always this kind of negotiation and charting of really unclear territory, and it changes with each project. And as time grew, my working relationship with some of these choreographers grew from project to project. And then the areas became bigger and wider, and in fact, more exciting for me, just dramaturg, which then included into the, what we call gray areas of creative producing, writing copy to help clarify promotional material for touring performances. Then I became involved that way. And still, yes, there was the question of accountability to artist, to producer, and then, of course, as projects grew bigger, co-presenters came into play, co-commissions, different countries. Money became important, obviously. There were also times where in the last few projects, or the previous ones, the really present ones now, where there were talks of certain institution producers talking about money and cost of certain set designs. And then the discussion went in to include me. So there was at times always the question, okay, where do I stand in this? Because I do see, as a producer with experience, the practicality of certain cost measures in terms of a set design. Do I then agree with the producer? Do I then have a discussion with the artist? The way that I'm still learning is that we kept it very separate, and I would talk to the artist, I would also talk to the producer or the institutions, and then to see where thing goes. For the purpose of this particular case I'm talking about, at the end of the day, I did agree with the artist and said, we need to get this set going for very particular reasons, because there was a very strong artistic rationale behind it. It literally hung on the entire concept of the performance. But yet, it's uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable. But I think it's about generating the kind of relationships we've been talking about, where you have to negotiate. And there is a certain amount of gray areas that we do have to be aware. And I think one way we do it is that we keep talking about it, where I actually tell the producer or the artist, I don't usually need to talk about this, but if we want to talk about this, I need to know that everybody is talking about it, that I'm involved in it, especially when it comes to money. Thanks. Anybody has any response or onto another question or observation?
I'm Yudi from Indonesia. If we, at a certain degree, agree with the notion that dramaturgy is an operating system or fundamental process in the performance making, but we we cannot come to an agreement. What is the definition of a dramaturg? What is the role of the dramaturg? And the definition and the role of the dramaturg is ambiguous and full of contradiction, for instance. Then I have this question: what is the situation, what is the need that initiate this, this function that we name it right now as dramaturg? What is the background? What is the reason of this, this position? Let's just say. That's my question.
Yair, would you like to respond to that? Yeah, please.
I can try to respond because, and I will talk from an artist point of view, not from a dramaturg point of view, and it really raised for me the thought about the expert, or the one with more. When we are talking about mentoring, or we are talking about to be the expert, or to come to a process from a, from an experience point of view. So I kind of thinking, well, when I'm creating, I have to have a dramaturg, even though I have a lot of experience, I've done a lot of things, I dramaturged a lot of pieces. But when I'm creating, I'm this boy who doesn't know what he's doing. And then I need this position of a dramaturg to hold my hand and to explain me what I'm doing from an outside position. So then he's not more experienced than me, or she's not more experienced than me, she doesn't know more than me, but this is the position, to be from the outside and to try to explain you what you are doing, even though I have a lot of an experience of telling other people what they are doing, or like doing, it's like very shallow definition now, but I am using these shallow words like to make my point. So then the position of the dramaturg is, it has to be there to create this kind of relationship between the inside and the outside. I'm not sure I'm agreeing that I'm working in the independent scene, and I'm a part of an institute, so I'm curating an institute, but I don't want the dramaturg to be the bridge from the institute to the artist. I really cannot understand this, even though I understand that it exists. But the dramaturg is part of the production, is part of the team of the production we are working with. So I would never ask the dramaturg, as a curator, I would never ask the dramaturg to be in my side and not with the artist, or the opposite, because then it will get crazy. So it will get like, I don't need my kind of spy in a production, but this is like how I'm working on it. I can never be I can never agree with the theater if the artist I'm working with is not agreeing with the theater. So it's impossible for me, because we are partners, we are collaborators, we are doing the same project together. And the position of the dramaturg is really to be this kind of person who is walking hand to hand with the artist, with the production. Both, and I can say it both as an artist and both as a dramaturg for other artists. This is kind of my...
Great, thank you. Different response, different way to explain or to help answer you this question.
Just bring in a specific example of a play production of Emperor and the Galilean by a theater company from Lebanon. Emperor and Galilean is one of the biggest texts that Ibsen has written. It's an 800-page text. And it is impossible, almost near to impossible, to put this production on stage the way it is. So the dramaturg of that company, Omar Abi Azhar, he comes up with this idea of a dramaturgical framework where a theater company in exile is forced to perform a play in front of an audience, and the director chooses Emperor and the Galilean. Now, that dramaturgical framework allows the play to happen. So you see a director desperately trying to dictate to his actors on how to do this play, and in the process there is a mutiny, the actors murder the director. And then the lead actor who has murdered the director now takes on the role of the director, and he turns out to be an even worse monster than the director whom he murdered. And the women in the company comes and strangles him. So this is a dramaturgical framework which allowed this production to happen. So otherwise, I don't know how this company is going to pull together this production. Yeah.
I think what's happening here is in trying to define and lock down, I think it's really opened it up further to the question of the position, the role, the function, more metaphors and allegories and visualization of the function, the person, the thing has all come into play. It's true. I think for me, what was valuable to remember is that these ambiguities are generative, they are productive. And as I think with all of us know, especially those who have been practicing dramaturgy, whether as artists or whether as dramaturgs, is that there is room to play. I do like what Yaya said about a boy holding hands. The holding hands is not as in holding hands to guide, but rather someone to play along with. And the playing will definitely include the fighting. But the fighting is when then you clarify how hard, how deep you can play, how far you can play together or for something else or for the game that you're trying to shape. So yeah, just quickly on talking about how the institution, the dramaturg and the production team and the idea of the spy. I have to say the first time I was engaged by Esplanade, and I don't think this is anything bad to say, that I did feel like, oh dear, am I betraying the artist's trust if I do make comments or if I have discussions with the producer on certain things? The fact was that the artist was from another country, and there were certain kinds of practices, systems that he had to understand. And also I had to understand his customs and practices from that particular country. And this goes back to Ken's phrasing of cultural mediation, which goes beyond just the literal cultural artistic practices, but in all inclusive term of what David refers to, the operating systems. The operating systems here is one within another, like a babushka doll, right? Where we talk about then artistic practices, then it goes into production practices, institutional practices, then it goes into larger social-cultural practices. So it did occur to me at some point, am I being a spy? But the fact remains that if I work in cross-cultural, transcultural, intercultural settings, there are discussions to be had with producer, me with artist, where it benefits all, and then literally to sit producer and artist down and say, okay, sort it out, you guys, because there's only so much the dramaturg can do. Yeah? Right. Any last minute? Charlene?
Yeah, I just wanted to throw in a word that came to mind, which is the degree to which a dramaturg needs to engage with complicity and complicité. You know, because we are complicit in something, and there is no pure existence, no pure I. But then to play with it and work with that liminal space, I think, is to engage with the complicité. And the complicity is not necessarily a bad thing that one has to then, get all morally worked up about. But I think it's part of a working relationship with any organization, any group of people, any collaboration. There is a certain amount of capacity to be complicit with something, and I use it with that tinge of darkness that surrounds it.
Yeah, can I have? I've thought about what Yudi was saying, and I think, and it reminded me of a conversation I had with the director who said, why do you need a dramaturg? We've survived so well for the past 20, 30, 40 years. Without a dramaturg, why do you have to spend money hiring this person to do essentially what a director is already doing? At which point I said to him, well, you're not producing art 40, 50 years ago. You're producing art now, and the conditions are different. You're encountering very different intercultural collaborations, which you need another person to help you out. It is not an encumbrance. So I think what I would like to say is that the conditions of production and the conditions of art making are very different, and to include another person actually deepens and widens the art making itself. So that's all I have to say.
Ying Luan.
Then I thought the title is quite apt. If you're an art maker, it's almost like, you're standing in this particular location. You actually don't quite know the terrain you're working with because you're exploring the terrain. But at the end, you actually need a mapper to actually help you to draw the latitudes, all the different signposting, and you know what you're working with. And you decide what kind of maps you really want. So I think a lot of time the dramaturg is actually like the map maker. They call it the cartographer. Yeah, but cartography is actually an art. So there's an artistic process at the same time. That's why my response then would be in its relation with funders, then that's where the artistic process becomes very important in that negotiation, rather than just merely from the financial point of view. So yes, I think that became part of it, which then brought me to just now, I think, when she mentioned about the idea of the community. Again, because I think when we work in a production, there is a community at work, whether it's just the artistic community that's working in there, and the financial or the administrator, but there's also the audience. Again, together, actually, we are trying to map something. Actually, the dramaturg map that particular terrain where we all are in, and just to find our place, which is very much about placing. Yeah.
Thank you. Any pressing last-minute comments? One more from Alison, yeah, and then we wrap.
That's back to that same question. I think that any conversation about dramaturgy, in my mind, sort of gets a bit hijacked by the idea of the dramaturg, and that actually it's about a dramaturgical consciousness, which is a term that came up in the Dramaturgs project a few years back in Melbourne with Paul Monaghan, and it has been really useful for me in terms of what is it that we actually want to develop? Well, it's dramaturgical thinking, the ability to think dramaturgically and to do so consciously. So it doesn't have to be somebody called a dramaturg. It's becoming clear to me that even though I find this sort of fetishizing of the role takes over, so that even though I resist it quite often, I'm finding it now impossible to resist it. So maybe it's just that we're trying to articulate a role, and the dramaturg has become, because it is about the dramaturgy, I still really resist this idea that the dramaturg has some sort of soul, understanding of the dramaturgy, very, very much so. But it is about this person that we're hearing about a lot that is in there, that can be conscious, can be documenting, can be archiving, can be articulating, can be doing all of those sorts of things that it's much easier to do when you're not right inside in the middle. And I think it's very clear that we're moving in and out of these roles. Oh, thank you, gods. Oh, it's amazing. Just give me the microphone and,
Talk.
I'll stop.
Talk about great timing, yeah? On that note and sound, I'd like to wrap this session up. Thank you, everyone, for really, really getting together. Thank you so much. So, just very quickly, we're going to break now for lunch. We have an hour and a half, but there are a few just key housekeeping things that I'd like to quickly talk about. One is that speakers who are involved in the next session, it would be great if we can come back by 1:45, the latest, 1:30, ideal, to do a bit of setup and everything else. The next session will continue on the vein of, I hate to use this word, but theorizing or articulating the thinking of dramaturgy, the function, the practice, and hopefully maybe finding some threads from a regional point of view. We will have Peter Ekasol, Nanako Nakajima, and Shintaro Fuji, who will be up here with us to talk about that. So for now, thank you very much for this session. Lunch for the foreign speakers, you may want to get tips on where to go around here if it's not pouring outside. Yeah. So we'll meet back here. The next session begins promptly at 2, yes? Thank you very much.
Thank you.